You sat down tonight knowing exactly what you were doing. You had studied, you had a plan, you were ready. And somewhere between the first hand and the last one, everything fell apart again. The good hands lost. The bluffs got called. The reads felt wrong. And you left the table with that specific, exhausting feeling that you cannot quite name. Not just that you lost, that nothing worked, not even the things that should have worked. That feeling. That is what we are talking about today, and I am going to show you that it has almost nothing to do with your cards, your opponents, or your luck. Let me describe a night you have probably had. You pick up pocket aces in the first 30 minutes. You play them well. You get all the money and good. And a player with 6-3 offsuit catches runner-runner to make a straight that should not exist. You shake it off. You tell yourself that was variance. That is what you were supposed to say. Then the next hour, you have top pair, top kicker, and you get check raised by someone who turns over 2 pair with a hand they never should have been playing. You fold. You were right to fold. But it still cost you chips, and it costs you something harder to measure. Something shifts in how you are making decisions. You start second-guessing. You start playing not to be wrong instead of playing to be right. The session is not over yet, but something essential in your decision-making has quietly broken. Then the bluff. You pick a spot that looks perfect. You have been watching this player for an hour. You have seen exactly how he responds to pressure. You fire a well-sized bet on the river. He calls instantly with second pair and says nothing. Does not even look at you. Just pulls the chips toward him. And now you are not just losing money. You are losing trust in your own reads. Trust in your own judgment. Trust in the process you thought you understood. This is the pattern. This is what happens to almost every player at every level more often than they realize. And the reason I can describe it this clearly is because it is not random. It follows a very specific and predictable psychological sequence. Understanding that sequence is the difference between a player who keeps bleeding and a player who actually fixes the problem. And here is the thing nobody wants to say out loud. Most of the time, when nothing works at the poker table, the cards are not the cause. Your mental state is. The invisible decisions you are making before you even look at your whole cards. The emotional weight you carried with you when you sat down. The autopilot that kicked in 40 minutes into the session when you thought you were still thinking clearly. This is where it gets interesting. And this is where most players, even experienced ones, have a blind spot the size of a full buy-in. Before we go deeper into this, I want to say something important. Everything I'm going to explain today, the mental leaks, the decision framework, the emotional awareness tools, all of it is structured into a complete system inside the mind of a grinder ebook collection. 10 books, each one built to address a specific layer of how the mind breaks down at the poker table and how to rebuild it into something that actually holds under pressure. If you have ever felt like the thing I just described, where you know what to do, but you cannot quite do it when the session gets hard, that gap is exactly what this system was built for. The link is in the pinned comment. If this video gives you something real today, the collection gives you the complete architecture. Now let us keep going. There is a concept in performance psychology called the Yerkes-Dodson law. It describes the relationship between mental arousal and performance quality. The idea is this. A small amount of pressure actually improves your performance. You are sharper, more focused, more present. But past a certain point, more pressure does not make you better. It makes you worse. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for complex reasoning, planning ahead, and impulse control, begins to shut down. Not gradually, abruptly. And what takes over is your limbic system, the emotional brain. The one that was designed not for poker strategy, but for survival. When your limbic system is running the table, you are not making decisions. You are reacting. Every bet your opponent makes feels like a threat. Every pot you lose feels like an attack on your judgment. Every bad beat is not just variance. It is evidence that you are not good enough, that the session is against you, that nothing you do will matter. Your thinking narrows to the hand in front of you. The session context disappears. The long-term perspective disappears. And you start playing poker with the part of your brain that cannot play poker. Here is what this looks like in real time. The player who was folding correctly 2 hours ago starts calling bets he would never call in a calm state. Not because the pot odds changed, not because his reads got better, because his emotional brain decided that folding one more time feels worse than being wrong on a call. That is not a strategic calculation. That is a pain avoidance response, and it costs money that no amount of studying will ever get back. This is the first mental leak. The shift from deliberate thinking to emotional reaction. And the brutal part is that when you are in it, it does not feel like you have shifted. It feels like you are still thinking clearly. That is the nature of this state. The prefrontal cortex, even as it loses influence, generates a feeling of logical coherence. You feel like you are reasoning, but you are rationalizing. There is a significant difference, and the difference is visible in your chip count at the end of the night. The second mental leak is more subtle and in some ways more expensive. It is what I call autopilot drift. And it happens to almost every player who has been at the table for more than 90 minutes, regardless of whether they are winning or losing. Here is how it works. When you first sit down, you are present. You are watching. You are picking up information. Who limps in early position? Who checks back the flop when they miss? Who bets quickly when they have it and slowly when they do not? You are building a model of the table, and you are making decisions that interact with that model. This is deliberate, conscious thinking. This is your best poker. Then, slowly, without a clear moment you can point to, you slip into pattern. You stop updating the model. You start making decisions based on general principles rather than specific reads. You c-bet because you raise preflop and players c-bet after raising preflop. Not because this board texture against this player at this stack depth actually calls for it. You fold to aggression because aggression often means strength. Not because you have a specific read on this player's aggression tendencies on this run-out. The decisions start looking correct from the outside. They might even be statistically correct in some aggregate sense, but they are no longer tailored to what is actually happening at this table, in this session, with these players. You are applying a template to a situation that requires observation, and the template, even when it is a good template, is not the same as thinking. Research into decision fatigue shows that after roughly 60 to 90 minutes of high-intensity cognitive effort, the quality of complex decision-making declines measurably. Poker is exactly the kind of high-intensity cognitive effort they are describing. You are processing incomplete information, managing emotional states, tracking multiple variables, and making judgment calls continuously. Your brain uses ATP, its cellular fuel, at an accelerated rate. And as that fuel depletes, the brain defaults to its simplest, least energy-intensive patterns. Autopilot is not laziness. It is neurology, but it is still costing you money. This is where most players lose an entire month's worth of edge without ever realizing it. The third mental leak is the one that almost nobody talks about honestly, because talking about it honestly requires a level of self-awareness that is uncomfortable to maintain. It is the ego at the table. Poker is an environment where the ego is constantly under attack. Every bad beat is a public event. Every bluff that gets called is visible. Every fold you make in a contested pot is a statement about your judgment. And the ego, which is fundamentally a self-protection system, starts making decisions based on how those decisions will look, rather than whether they are correct. The player who calls a river bet they know they should fold because they do not want to be bluffed, not because the pot odds support it, not because they have a strong read that their hand is good, because folding would feel like losing, and calling at least gives them a chance to be right. This is the ego playing poker, and the ego is one of the worst poker players in the world. The player who fires a third barrel on a board that has completely shifted against them, not because their range supports the bluff, but because they have built a narrative about the hand and cannot let go of it. They see themselves as the aggressor in this pot. They started the story of this hand as the player applying pressure. And the ego cannot accept that the story needs to change even when the evidence is overwhelming that it should. Or the player who goes on tilt, not primarily because of the money they lost, but because of the type of player they lost it to. There is a specific flavor of frustration that comes from being beaten by someone you considered a worse player than yourself. That is pure ego. It produces the most irrational adjustments in all of poker. Players start targeting specific opponents for revenge, which is not a strategy. It is an emotional response disguised as strategy. Here is the question you need to sit with. At the table tonight, are you making decisions based on what the situation calls for? Or are you making decisions based on who you believe yourself to be as a player? Those two things are supposed to align. For most players, in most sessions, after the first bad beat or the first bad bluff, they start to diverge. And the gap between them is where the money goes. Now let me give you something you can actually use, because understanding what is breaking down is only valuable if you have a framework to rebuild it. And I want to give you a specific practical one right now. It is called the 3-second decision audit, and you can use it at the table starting tonight. Before you act on any significant decision, any call, raise, or fold that involves more than a trivial amount of chips, you pause for 3 seconds. Not to think about the hand, you have already been thinking about the hand. You pause to answer 3 questions internally. These take practice, but they become fast with repetition. First question: am I playing this hand, or am I playing my emotions from the last hand? This single question, asked honestly, will prevent more leaks than any strategic adjustment you have ever made. If the answer is that your last hand is bleeding into this one, you do not fold or call based on emotion. You take a breath. You reset. You evaluate this hand as if the last one never happened. Second question: am I responding to this specific player in this specific situation, or am I running a script? If you notice that your decision is automatic, that you are about to act without having consciously constructed a reason based on the current information, that is autopilot. It does not mean the automatic action is wrong. It means you need to verify it with a moment of deliberate thought before committing. Third question: if I explain this decision to someone who respects my game, will the reason I give be the real reason? This is the ego check. If the real reason you are calling is because you do not want to be bluffed and the reason you would give is pot odds, those two things need to reconcile before you put chips in the middle. 3 seconds, 3 questions. That is the pre-decision habit that separates reactive play from structured play. It will not save every hand. It will save the hands that compound into the sessions that compound into the months that compound into the player you actually become. There is a deeper truth underneath all of this that I want you to hear clearly before we close, because this is the shift that changes everything. The feeling that nothing works when you sit at a poker table is not evidence that the game is broken or that you are hopeless or that variance has targeted you personally. It is evidence of something much more correctable. It is evidence that your process is not yet consistent enough to override your emotional responses when the session gets hard. Every player who has moved from feeling like nothing works to feeling like they have genuine control over their results at the table has made the same shift. Not a strategic shift, a foundational one. They stopped asking, why are my results bad, and started asking, what is actually happening in my mind when the results go bad. They got curious about the mechanism instead of just frustrated by the outcome. Jared Tendler, who is considered the most important mental game coach in poker history, describes this as the difference between a player who experiences emotional states and a player who observes them. The player who experiences tilt is inside it. It controls the decisions. The player who observes tilt notices it arising, can name it, can track its effects, and can intervene before it corrupts the session. The skill of observation is learnable, but it takes deliberate practice. It does not happen from reading one article or watching one video. It happens from consistent, structured attention to the patterns of your own psychology at the table. This is the work, and it is the most valuable work you can do as a poker player right now, regardless of your level. If you are still watching this, then you recognized yourself somewhere in what we talked about today. That recognition is not comfortable, but it is exactly the right signal, because the players who never recognize themselves in these patterns are the ones who never change. They keep attributing the problem to the cards, to the opponents, to the site, to the moon phase, to anything external. And they stay stuck. You are not stuck. You are at the beginning of understanding something that most players spend years circling around without ever landing on clearly. The Mind of a Grinder complete system exists to give you the structured path through all of it. 10 ebooks that move from the mental game foundations through decision frameworks, through emotional regulation, through strategic execution, in a sequence that is designed to work in the order you read them. This is not a collection you dip into randomly. It is a system, and systems produce results that isolated information cannot. The complete collection is $29.90. The link is in the pinned comment. This is the launch price, and it will not stay here. If this video gave you something real, the system will give you the complete architecture you need to stop the patterns we talked about today from running your sessions. Now the close. You sat down at that table with knowledge, with intention, with a real desire to play well, and something inside the session, not in the cards, not in the opponents, but inside the invisible machinery of your own decision-making, caused it to fall apart. That something has a name now. You know what the first leak looks like. You know what autopilot drift feels like when it starts. You know what the ego does when it gets scared. The 3-second audit. You have language for something that used to just be a feeling. Language changes everything. Because once you can name what is happening, you are no longer a passenger in the session. You are an observer. And observers become participants. And participants who know what they are observing become players who make decisions that are actually connected to what is happening at the table right now, not to what happened 2 hands ago, not to how they need the night to end, not to who they need to prove something to. That is the shift. That is the whole thing. And it is available to you. Leave a comment right now. Tell me one thing that breaks down in your game when the session gets hard. One specific thing. Not bad luck. Not bad cards. What actually happens in your head. Read the other comments. You will find yourself in them. And you will realize that this is not a personal failure. It is a shared experience with a shared solution. Like this video. Subscribe to Mind of a Grinder. And go play your next session with your eyes open. Not to the cards, to yourself. That is where the game actually lives.